All right, guys, so the mainstream media and the powers that be are trying to cancel Joe Rogan, right? I know that's not a surprise to any of you guys, okay? Anybody that's been paying attention that they're trying to cancel him, but they're actually really trying to cancel this man, okay? They're actually trying to basically Alex Jones him, okay? Put him on the edges and the fringes of the internet where his reach will be limited. Okay, he won't be able to reach hundreds of millions of people the way that he does now. However, the problem is that Joe Rogan is not French, right? He is actually in line with the opinions of a lot of people in this country, right? But it's not really about what Joe Rogan's views are. It's about the views that he allows on his platform. And that is what makes him so successful. In fact, Joe Rogan's podcast outperforms all of mainstream legacy media. And you best believe, failing mainstream legacy media outlets like CNN are pissed, right? They're pissed. Okay, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, I got to get into the background here. As a part of this attempt to deplatform Joe Rogan and cancel him, the so-called medical community, right, has come out with a letter basically demanding that Spotify cancel Joe Rogan. They put an end to Joe Rogan's COVID lives, aka take his podcast off their platform. That's what they're asking for. Okay, that's what they're asking for. They're asking for complete and total silence, right? So let's read this headline real quick. A menace to public health. Doctors demand Spotify puts an end to COVID lives on the Joe Rogan Experience. Unlike many platforms, Spotify doesn't have a clear policy prohibiting misinformation. 270 physicians and scientists are hoping to change that. Okay, so keep this headline in mind, right? The 270 doctors, right, that are saying this. But first, let's actually play a clip of CNN discussing this call from these doctors to deplatform Joe Rogan.
You know, I think at the very minimum, it would be warning signs and banners that would be issued on particular episodes or on shows in particular that were kind of repeated offenders of that, of that infringement on that policy. It would be directing people to credible sources like the CDC or WHO on vaccine-related information or other sources of evidence, since there seems to be just a ton of speculation that ends up happening on these shows, and people take it as infallible. People take it as somehow the other side of science, when really there's a ton of consensus here to prove that what that information is actually incorrect. So at the minimum, it would be banners and warnings.
Yeah. And Joe Rogan, so significant here because it's the most listened to podcast in the world. Millions of people listen to each episode. Have you heard anything quickly from Spotify?
No, we have not.
Okay,
I have not personally.
So we reached out to Spotify. We reached out to Joe Rogan. We've not heard anything, but I want to read to you what Spotify said, the statement they released back in April. This is what Spotify said. Spotify prohibits content on the platform which promotes dangerous, false, deceptive, or misleading content about COVID-19 that may cause offline harm and or pose a direct threat to public health. When content that violates this standard is identified, it is removed from the platform. Is that not good enough, or what do you think about that?
Well, it's just not being enforced, right? I mean, if we talk about the word prohibit, that would mean it would not be allowed to air. I know that YouTube removed the video version of the podcast, but that podcast is still available on Spotify. And that is a problem because it is clearly a policy that exists but is not being enforced. And we're asking for more. We're asking for actual ownership and enforcement of policies that do cause public health harm and that do spread misinformation.
All right, Jessica Malate Rivera, thank you so much for your time.
All right, so as you can see that is CNN basically seething at the mouth to try to deplatform Joe Rogan, okay? Because they simply don't like the fact that Joe Rogan is more popular than them, okay? A lot of these so-called journalists, I'm going to tell you something. They feel some type of way about the idea of somebody who does not have a degree in journalism being more listened to in regards to the news than they are, okay? Because they feel like, oh, well, I put in the work. Okay, I'm credentialed. The fact that Joe Rogan doesn't have credentials, it really pisses them off. It really does. And the fact that he's more popular than all of their networks almost combined really makes it even worse. And this is why you see so many of them trying to take the guy off air, right? Because if you can't beat them, then just cancel them. Just cancel them. Okay? That is what's happening right now with Joe Rogan in regards to the hate from the mainstream media. Okay? But here's the thing. Again, Joe Rogan, kind of like Dave Chappelle, in my opinion, is uncancelable. You cannot cancel the guy. His audience is just too big, and people are going to choose Joe Rogan over everybody else, okay, that's complaining every single day of the week. Just like people are going to choose Dave Chappelle over the complaints of the trans employees at Netflix any day of the week. It is what it is. It is what it is. So these guys, they're too big to fail. They're too big to fail. So speaking of this list of doctors, right, come to find out, they've been exposed as they're not actually really doctors, right? They're not medical professionals. All of them are not physicians, okay? As there's a list of these so-called medical professionals that has came out that has exposed who they actually are. So let's actually read here some of the titles of these people, okay? So we have Christopher McMillan, a PhD, right? Not an MD. I don't think that's a medical doctor. He's a postdoctoral fellow, okay, at the University of Queensland. Cole Creighton, director of research at Grasshopper Farms. Not really a doctor, okay? He's not a doctor in my opinion, okay? In fact, this guy allegedly is a weed scientist, right? He's the weed man, okay? So these guys got the weed man signing on to this letter to have Joe Rogan deplatform over COVID misinformation. Again, it's almost as if they can't find 270 real doctors, MDs, to do this, because we haven't even come across an MD yet. We have a dentist, not a doctor, not an MD. We have a physician's assistant, not an MD. We have a professor, not an MD. We have an MSN. I don't know what that is. Oh, nope, that's a nurse practitioner. So again, not an MD, an epidemiological researcher. That's the closest, right? That's relevant, okay? Okay, to the subject matter here that they're trying to cancel them over, but still not an MD. Finally, we have an MD, Mr. Daniel Anthony Barone, okay, who's an associate professor of clinical neurology at Weill Cornell Medicine. Okay, so they finally got an MD, right? But this is not the list of 270 some doctors, doctors, right? That's not what this is. These aren't medical doctors, okay? These are just random people who are somewhat credentialed, signed a letter calling to silence Joe Rogan. That's what it is. But again, it shows you just how desperate these people are that they couldn't even get 270 MDs to actually do it. It's so hilarious. You can't make this stuff up. So let's read a little bit more here about these this letter. Okay, let's read it in depth. 270 doctors called out Joe Rogan, but the authors of the letter and a vast majority of the signatories are not medical doctors. Are you seeing all of those blaring corporate press headlines targeting Joe Rogan this weekend, reporting on a letter from 270 doctors, which described the famous podcaster as a menace to public health? Well, it turns out that the real arbiters of misinformation are the individuals behind the letter itself, and they are being helped along by a corrupt corporate media that is misreporting the credentials of its signatories. It was first reported by Rolling Stone with a story titled "Doctors Demand Spotify Puts an End to COVID Lies on Joe Rogan Experience." Yes, the media and big tech want to create the image of hundreds of strong coalition of medical doctors who are genuinely concerned about Joe Rogan's conversations on his massive platform. Yes, that's exactly what they want to do. Twitter even got in on a propaganda campaign against Rogan, adding this medical expert's letter to their curated headline section. Yeah. So again, Twitter reported on it because they're all in on it. They all operate as one big conglomerate. Well, I reviewed this open letter, and it turns out that only around 100 of the 270 signatories to the letter are people with qualified medical degrees, and a large chunk of that 100 or so medical doctors are MDs employed at universities who are in fact not practitioners of medicine. Yet part of the letter reads, quote, "As physicians, we bear the arduous weight of a pandemic that has stretched our medical systems to their limits and only stands to be exacerbated by the anti-vaccination sentiment woven into this and other episodes of Rogan's podcast." Wow, incredible. So they started a letter trying to frame it as they're actual practicing physicians, right? When most of the list is not even medical doctors. And the ones that are medical doctors don't even practice. Paradoxically, the disseminators of this petition are guilty of the very misinformation label that they've attached to Rogan. In fact, neither of the two reported co-authors of the letter, Jessica Rivera and Ben Ron, possesses medical degrees. Rivera holds a master's degree and Rain is a PhD academic who researches psychiatry. Again, these are not medical doctors. These people are not all that qualified to talk about COVID, right? They're about as qualified as Joe Rogan is. Yeah, it's crazy. The letter denouncing Joe Rogan and pressuring Spotify to censor his speech has all kinds of random signatories. By my count, the letter is signed by over 50 PhD academics, around 60 college professors, 29 nurses, 10 students, 4 medical residents, and even a handful of science podcasters. So yeah, that letter is kind of phony, right? It's definitely propaganda, right? That's what it is. Again, because a lot of people, it seems like, that signed that letter aren't even as qualified as Joe Rogan is to speak about this subject, right? According to their own arguments, okay? Because the argument against Joe Rogan is that, well, he's not qualified, right? He doesn't have credentials, okay? And again, a lot of those people on that list are just as unqualified as Joe Rogan. And as all this backlash comes against Joe Rogan, Spotify has to make a move, right? Or just not say anything. And it seems like that's kind of what they're doing, as they are mum after Joe Rogan critics call for change to prevent COVID misinformation on platforms. So Spotify isn't saying anything. Let's read here. Spotify has not publicly addressed calls for change after liberal media outlets and a group of medical professionals urged the streaming platform to take action against what they call COVID-related misinformation sparked by podcasting giant Joe Rogan. Last week, a group of advocates, professors, scientists, and medical professionals signed an open letter that asked Spotify to take action against mass information events on its platform after the Joe Rogan Experience podcast irked the group with a highly controversial episode interview with Dr. Robert Malone. The episode has been criticized for promoting baseless conspiracy theories, and the GRE has a concerning history of broadcasting misinformation, particularly regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, by allowing the propaganda of false and societal harmful assertions. Spotify is enabling its hosted media to damage public scientific research and sow doubt in the credibility of data-driven guidance offered by medical professionals, the letter said. GRE number 1757 is not the only transgression to occur on the Spotify platform, but a relevant example of the platform's failure to mitigate the damage it's causing. Okay, so yeah, classic technique here. Okay, basically say, hey, Spotify, as long as you're platforming Joe Rogan, you're responsible for all the damage, right? Not only happened to society, but to science, right? You're a threat to science. Even though science is supposed to be debated in the public, right? It's supposed to be debated in the public. You're supposed to be open to all ideas, okay? And you let the facts and the data speak for themselves. You're supposed to be able to debate over this stuff, but that's not what they want. They want to silence debate. They want to silence dissent. The open letter blasted Rogan for pushing misleading and false claims on his podcast, provoking distrust in science and medicine during the ongoing COVID pandemic. And noted that Dr. Malone has been suspended from Twitter for spreading misinformation about COVID. With an estimated 11 million listeners per episode, Joe Rogan Experience is the world's largest podcast and has tremendous influence. Though Spotify has a responsibility to mitigate the spread of misinformation on its platform, the company presently has no misinformation policy, said the letter, which received extensive media attention. All right, so Spotify, again, is silent on this. And in fact, they've published 2 episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience after this, right? Which basically means that, hey, you know what? They're probably just not going to say anything and hope that it blows over, right? That's what they're going to do. That's what it seems like, because the dude makes too much money. He's too valuable for them to do anything. They can't do anything about it, okay? I mean, you had internal employees that have tried to deplatform Joe Rogan, and they have not been successful. They're just some people that are just simply untouchable. And what these people don't realize, that the more that you call to deplatform the dude, the more popular he's going to get, the more people are going to listen to him and give more weight to the things that he's saying, give more weight to the guests that he's having on his podcast, because there's so much backlash and pushback against just allowing the dude to have a platform. So again, these people, man, when it comes to this censorship, you know, they're really working against their own best interest, because they're really bringing more attention to his podcast than he will otherwise be getting, which is leading more people to hear these so-called misinformation that they're trying to avoid being spread. Okay. And trying to not spread misinformation, they're also spreading misinformation about who signed this letter to stop the misinformation, right? Which is the irony of this whole thing. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.